Today on Talking Scuba, we're going to be chatting about my favourite subject, why I dive on a twin set. Now, a twin set to me is any combination of more than one cylinder. And what I mean by that are maybe two cylinders, one either side mount. You can have one on your back and one side mount that I used to dive, or you can have two on your back. But in all cases, you have a separate, independent air supply, two air supplies, two regulators, two of everything. So why dive on a twin set? I guess the obvious answer is because you've got more air and you can stay down longer. Wrong. Well, yes, you do have more air, but let's talk about why you can't necessarily stay down there longer. You can see from my own setup here that I have two cylinders on my back, both completely independent. They're not connected by a manifold, but we'll talk about that later. So for the moment, let's talk about why you can't necessarily stay down there longer. And to keep things simple, I'm going to take an example of a 25-metre dive. And if you go down to 25 metres with an air mix, just air, EAN 21, Nitrox 21, your bottom time is limited to 26 minutes. And that applies to you whether you've got one tank on your back or two. Regardless of the amount of air you've got, 26 minutes and it's time to call the dive. And the reason for that is your NDL. That's your no decompression limit. And this means that your body has absorbed enough nitrogen. Any longer and you'll have to have a mandatory decompression stop to release the nitrogen. So unless you've been trained, recreational divers do not do decompression dives. So as I said, in this instance, regardless of the number of tanks of air you have, you all come up at the same time. No one has any advantage to having an extra 12-litre cylinder of gas on their back. But now let's take the same dive, 25 metres, and this time I've got a Nitrox mix on my back of 36. But now my computer is telling me that I have 59 minutes before I must call the dive. And this now poses the next question. Do I have enough gas to stay down on the bottom for 59 minutes? And the answer is probably, on a single cylinder, no. But on a twin cylinder, yes. And that was why 18 months ago I started carrying a spare cylinder, a 7-litre cylinder side slung with my 15-litre cylinder on my back. So for the next half a dozen dives or so, 25-30 metres, I was quite comfortable that I had some extra gas with me and I wouldn't be the one that kept calling the dive because I was short of gas. But there was more that I hadn't realised. What was happening to me was my diving had improved. And I'm not talking just about my buoyancy or my trim. I'm talking about my concentration on my diving and not so much concentrating on where my buddy was. The visibility in the last couple of years in the English Channel has been diabolical, to say the least. So now, when I lose sight of my buddy for a few moments, because he's either gone the other side of a bulkhead or poking his torch in one of the various holes that the wrecks have, I don't stop my dive and suddenly start counting my minute before I ascend. With a spare cylinder on my back, I'm quite happy now to continue the dive, steadily, quietly, knowing that I will come across my buddy in the fullness of time, probably just around the next bit of metal. It's only thinking and looking back over those dives I did on a single cylinder in bad visibility, when I realised that I spent most of my time following my buddy, making sure I didn't lose touch with him, making sure I could still see his tank in the gloom, making sure I could still see his light. I wasn't concentrating very much on my own diving, my own trim, my own buoyancy, or where I was on the wreck, just following my buddy to make sure we didn't get lost. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that solo diving's a good thing. It isn't. But sometimes overreacting is as dangerous as continuing the dive slowly and steadily. I must say though, to try and add some balance to this, I have bought a 4000 lumen orca torch to try and aid this situation. So what other benefits are there of having extra air? Well, there's another one that I came across that I didn't realise until I had more air. Once I had built up enough dives to be confident in how much gas I was using, I was able to wait a little bit longer before I turned the dive, on a single cylinder that is. I used to indicate to my buddy to start with when I had 100 bar, and as time progressed that dropped down to 80 and 70 bar before I called the dive. And then the obvious used to happen. It used to take longer to deploy the DSMB for some reason. It always does when you're pushing the gas limits a little bit. And then your buddy suddenly decides to start stowing some of his stuff. He's putting stuff away and hanging around before starting the ascent. So the minutes tick by, very quietly but very steadily. And then after a relatively moderate ascent up to the safety stop, and you start doing a few minutes checking and faffing around, and wait for your 3 minutes to gently pass, and then another minute up to the surface. A quick check of your SPG, and you're starting to push the somewhat under 50 bar limit, sometimes closer to 30-40. And that on its own is not too much of a problem. One assumes your buddy's still got some air and he's on the surface, so things aren't too bad. But then comes the next situation where extra gas is useful. You pop your head above the surface and there's the boat just bobbing along about 50 yards away, having just stopped to pick up 2 other pairs. And the water's nice and rough, so you can't take the regulator out of your mouth, you've got to leave it in there for fear of swallowing half the ocean. So a few extra puffs of air into the BCD, and a few extra puffs of air into your dry suit, and a lot of breathing and puffing and trying to get yourself sorted out, seeing where the boat is and seeing what they're up to. Before you realise it, 10 minutes has passed and the boat's still not heading in your direction. And a quick glance at the SPG and you can see that you're starting to head down to an empty tank. Not quite, but it focuses the attention very much. So rather than lean back, relax and enjoy the next few minutes while you're bobbing around out there, the anxiety levels, you can't help it, but they do go up. So these days with a twin, I tend to concentrate more on where my buddy is, make my way over to him or her, so that we're together at least when the boat comes our way. That's a nice way of doing it, rather than sitting there panicking that the boat's going to head off in a different direction. But I think, to summarise, the safety aspect of having a completely independent source of air is the key to feeling relaxed and comfortable for me. Scuba equipment is more than just sports equipment, it's life-saving. And although it's rare to see equipment failure, just the knowledge that it could happen is always at the back of our mind. In spite of the fact that the tanks are regularly checked, I change my hoses fairly often, I change the O-rings where I can. Modern DIN connectors tend not to fail. Nevertheless, knowing that you've got a safe and secure secondary source of life support with you, for me, makes me feel very comfortable. And one of the, I suppose, objections to twinset is the weight. And yes, they are heavy, and I found my own unique way of solving this problem. I don't always dive on twin 12s. I've picked up a couple of 8.5 litre tanks. So I've got 17 litres on my back, which is enough for most dives, it really is. But I have the added benefit of having my twin independent cylinders there, which I really like. In fact, I go so far as to say that if I'm going anything more than 20 metres, I will normally grab my twinset. I'm used to that safe feeling. Maybe it's because I'm getting old, I don't know. But anyway, if you do look at twins, enjoy the looking and enjoy the diving and enjoy the security of knowing that you've got more gas than most. Anyway, whatever you do, keep diving, but most of all, keep safe. Take care.